Matt Mitrogrosso here, creator of Xenoplicity and the queue system that it runs on. Today's video, let's talk about when to roll the dice at your table. So when should you roll the dice at your table? It's possible, but you are on a time crunch, you don't have a lot of time, or if it's possible and it's extremely risky, or if it's possible, but it's very challenging and difficult for who that character is, sure, have them roll for it. Besides that, you shouldn't be rolling for things at the table, okay? Anything else, anything that's not covered within that should either automatically succeed or automatically fail. And it's that simple. It really is. So let me give you some examples. I'm not going to have a player roll for their character eating a meal. Now here's the thing, guys. In real life, it is possible anytime you eat a meal that you might choke and die on your food, okay? It's possible, right? That would be like a critical failure. But in the game, every time the characters stop to eat some food, you don't have them make a roll to determine whether or not that happens or whether or not they're in the clear, okay? I'm not going to have the characters roll for walking down the street. Well, I mean, in real life, you're walking down the street, you might trip, you might fall, right? That would be failing that roll. But movement, as a general rule, shouldn't involve any rolling, okay? It's just a foregone conclusion. And really, any general life skill should just automatically pass, okay? And this isn't just for things like eating and things like walking. If you're in a medieval setting, this also goes for things like riding a horse, okay? The average person in this setting, they've grown up around this. They understand how this works. It's a life skill that just is something that gets taught to anyone in this world. How to ride a horse, how to deal with the donkey or, a mule, or, how to deal with oxen. These are things that are going to be commonplace, typical common sense knowledge in a fantasy land kind of setting. And because of that, you don't need to have the players roll for if their characters can stay on a horse and just travel from town to town. Now, where a roll might be made is if they try to do mounted combat. But for just traveling on horseback, for just riding a horse, you don't need to have a skill on your character sheet for that. And you don't need to make a roll for that, okay? Same goes for modern day. If you're playing in a modern day setting or anything close to modern day and there's vehicles, you don't need to have a skill for driving a car. At least you shouldn't, okay? Not all games work the same way, but I would argue that a roll would never be necessary for your average just driving across town and just being in traffic, okay? That is a life skill that you just pick up as a general rule if you're living in modern society. Where you would make driving rolls is if you were in a chase or if you were in a race, or if there was some kind of crazy situation that happened right in front of you and you had to slam on your brakes to avoid it, right? Maybe like something similar to like a random encounter, as it were. These are things where a roll would come into play, but not for just the typical operation of the vehicle, okay? This is an important distinction. This also applies for other things in the game as well. If I've got a character at the table and he tells me, I want to draw my gun and shoot this guy in the head. And again, we're not talking about combat. We're talking about just us, we're role-playing at the table. Maybe you're just in a conversation with the guy and you just want to blow his head off. I'm not going to have the player roll for that. I'm just going to narrate the guy dying and I'm going to move on. You just run with it. This is not a combat situation. Now, if there was a chance for it, like let's say the guy that we're talking about also has a weapon and this is kind of like some kind of Mexican standoff situation, that's different. That's going to be a gunfight. So yeah, you roll initiative and you're going to, just wackiness is going to ensue. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, we're just walking down the street. You see someone that's just in an alley and you say, I want to kill this guy. There's no reason to roll for that. Here's another example. Let's say a rogue in whatever game you're playing, they're doing some kind of stealth tactic. They say, all right, I want to sneak up behind the guard and I've got my dagger out and I want to slit his throat. All right, don't roll damage for that. That's an absurd thing to do. If the guy's close enough to slit his throat and he has managed to stealth his way into a position where he can do it, okay, then you let the guy's throat get slit. you just let him die, okay? You narrate the guy getting his throat slit and you move on. Here's what I've seen happen in the game. I've seen a similar situation to this happen where the players say, all right, I'm perfectly in stealth mode here. Nobody knows I'm around. I'm hiding in the corners. I'm sneaking up. I'm right behind this guy. I've got my dagger in my hand. It's already ready. I just want to slit his throat, right? And the game master in this situation said, okay, well, just roll for damage, right? And the damage was like, he rolled like the minimal damage. And so it wasn't enough to kill this guy according to hit points, and so the guy basically just gets cut, but he doesn't die. And then now it's broken into an actual combat that was supposed to just be kind of like a, just one of your classic Rambo or Chuck Norris kind of, little quick, flash second death move on like a nameless guard. Okay. This could have played out in a very cinematic, very narrative way where it just got resolved and we just moved on. But instead, now it's going to drag everything out at the game table. Now it's got to be this whole thing. What you've done is you've added random chance to a situation that did not require it, nor did it call for it, okay? Let the assassin kill the nameless guard, okay? Heck, let him kill the keeper of the manor. Who cares? Let him kill the king and prince if he gets close enough. What difference does it make? There should be no plot armor, and there's no reason to have damage rolled for something unless you're in combat. Because here's the thing, guys. Attack rolls or damage rolls or whatever your system uses, these things are meant to replicate a combat situation. They're meant to replicate chaos on the battlefield, right? Not every blow lands the way it's supposed to land. Not every bullet hits the exact spot it's supposed to hit. You don't know how that's really going to play out. And so it makes sense to have things like attack rolls or like damage rolls or whatever your system uses. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a situation where it's an unsuspecting person that's just being murdered or that's just being killed or executed, assassinated. Okay, these aren't things that should require a roll. Maybe you have some stealth rolls leading up to getting in position, right? But at the end of the day, if it's a sniper and you've got the guy in your sights, just let his head explode. If your guy's got a dagger and he's coming up behind a guard, let the guy get his throat slit and just move on. A handgun, point blank to the face, is just as deadly as a bazooka, okay? When that trigger gets pulled, that person's dead. There's no workaround to that, okay? Now, we're not, again, leaving out supernatural creatures or magic or anything that might offer some kind of protection or resistance to said bullet in the head. But the point is that you need to have this mindset at your table of, is if it makes sense with the narrative of what's happening at the table, all right? If it makes sense in game world logic, okay? And there is no need for randomness to exist in the situation, then just dictate what's going to happen, okay? That's part of the role of the game master. You are there to dictate and adjudicate the rules, okay? And some of that is dictating what makes sense for the game world, okay? There's no need for a random chance to come into it. Another point on this is that if you are going to call on a roll, then you have to stick with what the roll result is. You can't call for someone to make a roll and then after the fact try to fudge the dice to fit with what you wanted to happen. Don't do this nonsense. This is ridiculous. It's cheating, guys. It's just straight out cheating. That's all this is. When you call for a roll, what you have said to the player is that I don't know how this is going to go. We're going to leave it to chance. That means success and failure are both on the table. You need to be okay with that. If you think success should not be possible, then do not let the player roll for it whatsoever, okay? And if you think failure is something that should not be on the table, then again, don't let the player roll for it whatsoever. You just come out and say it. Nah, you can't do what you're trying to do. It's just not going to work. Or you say, yeah, it automatically happens. And then you just narrate what it is, like how, what happens. Another example would be like a coup de grace, right? There's a guy laying at my feet. He's bleeding out, but he's not dead yet. So I say, all right, I'm going to take my sword, I'm going to shove it through his gut, or I'm going to plunge my sword right through his neck. That situation, you do not roll for attack. You do not roll for damage. You just simply say, he's dead. You don't want a situation where something as simple as a person laying there totally still, and you're saying that like you can't just go up and plunge that sword into his throat. Why? Why not? If that roll comes back a botch or a critical failure or a fumble or whatever your game has, what you've done is now the player is left in a situation where his character looks like an idiot, okay? The fighter goes to plunge his sword into this guy and finish him off, but instead he drops his sword, okay? Or maybe he breaks his sword. For what? For doing something that should just be like a 10-second narration and then you move on with the game? There are just certain things that should just, based on like the game world logic, just based on the fiction of the setting, should just happen, should just succeed, okay? And so be comfortable with that. Be comfortable with saying yes and just running with it and having them narrate it, success without rolling, or be comfortable with you saying no and just saying, you can't do that. It's like that classic example where sometimes people cite where they say, well, what about the persuade roll to make a king give up his kingdom and make you king? It doesn't matter how good your persuade is. That's not an option. You can't do that. You say that to the king, and then the king laughs at you and throws you in the dungeon for attempting a very stupid form of insurrection or treason, okay? That's not the way things work. Now, if the character has some blackmail evidence on the politician or on an aristocrat, and he wants to use that as leverage to get them to do something they otherwise would never do, well, maybe that does warrant a roll. And that's part of being a game master, is adjudicating those kind of situations. These are some of the judgment calls you make as a game master. Be very clear with the players on what's possible and what's not. Don't let them roll for something if you know you're not going to let it succeed. I have seen at the table situations where a game master, I was playing at a table and I said I was going to do something and the game master said, cool, roll for it. And then I rolled and I got a critical success. And then after the fact, when the game master saw that I had a critical success, their comeback is, well, actually, that doesn't work. And that frustrates anyone that's in that situation, because according to the game rules, if the game master says roll for it, then what you've told the player is there's a chance of success. And if a person gets the best possible success you could ever get, a critical success, the most peak awesome roll you can possibly achieve, and then you're still told no, well, what has happened is the game master has just lied to you. You have just broken trust with your table, with the players, okay? That's what it is. You lied to them. You told them there was a chance of something working, and then when they did everything right, you still denied them that, okay? That's a lie. That's a deception. And that will quickly erupt into, if not an argument at the table, it's going to be resentment at the table, okay? And justified resentment, because you have broken the trust between you and the players. So don't do that. Don't act that way. Don't be that guy, okay? So forget all that nonsense. You know, just tell them no. Say, nah, man, it doesn't matter what you roll. You're not going to be able to do that. And if you do that up front, then the player's like, cool. And they'll come up with a different solution. They'll come up with a different thing to do. It's not a big deal because the trust is maintained, okay? You don't always get told yes. Sometimes you just get told no, and you need to be comfortable with that as a player. With something that I know to be 100% guaranteed success, I have sometimes still called on players to make a roll, but not for whether they succeed or fail, but to determine how much time passes with that action, okay? Because I find the passage of time to be a pivotal part of a game. If you want it to be a living, breathing world, if you want it to be a fiction that people can really immerse themselves in, time has to pass, okay? And so you need to be tracking time. Well, okay, yeah, you're going to succeed, but did you do this in a day, or did it take a week to do it? I'll have sometimes them make a roll for whatever it is that we're talking about. An example might be a guy wants to repair a truck, okay? Well, how quickly is the repair done, right? If it's a mechanic character, I'm just gonna say, cool, like, I mean, you know what you're doing. Sure, you know, you can succeed, especially if there's no crunch on the time. If you have as much time in your garage as you wanna work on this truck, and there's really no danger associated with working on a truck, and it's not like it's a serious challenge, it's just a task that has to be performed, well, I'm just going to let the mechanic succeed at that. But I might still have them make a roll to determine, well, how quickly do you repair that truck, right? Like, are you able to fix this before lunch, or is this going to take you all day long? These are times where you might call in a roll just to kind of clarify on that spectrum of pass where that fits in, right? On a failure, on a roll like this, I would say that it just takes an extended period of time, longer than what should have happened, you know, longer than it should have taken, right? Like, you start fixing that and then something else breaks, and, you know, and this happens sometimes, right? Like, if you're working on your car, sometimes you start taking something apart to fix it, and then you realize, well, oh man, I need another part. I didn't even think I needed this, and I don't have it. I've got to run back to the store. Things can happen at a task that drag it out. There's all kinds of ways that something like this could be narrated in the game world, but on a failure, that's what happens. It's not that they actually fail at doing it, it's just that it's going to take a long time to complete what they're guaranteed to do, okay? But if they pass, if they succeed, then the degree by which they succeed, that's going to speed it up even more, okay? And again, there doesn't have to be like this. Some games don't have a mechanic for this in place. Some games do. And if your game doesn't have a mechanic like this, then just kind of go with what feels right. Go with a gut intuition for what an extended period of time would be, or what an expedited time to be if it was a really good success. These are just things that you can just make judgment calls as a game master. Don't have people roll for things that are mundane or easy. If it's an easy task, cool, they just do it. It's just a matter of how much time is going to pass. That's all you need to know. That's the only thing you need to track at that point. And otherwise, you let them have it. You don't, you know, a socialite character goes into a bar and wants to pick up a girl. Why even roll for that? Just let it happen. Cool. Narrate to me like the kind of chick you're approaching. You know, you've got her around your arm now. You know, you kind of smooth talk her for a couple minutes, and now she's interested. She wants to dance with you, whatever, you know, and you just let it happen. Here's the thing. In a social situation, if you're calling on like a reaction roll, or in Xenoplicity, we use disposition rolls to determine the mood or the attitude of the NPC, you know, that you kind of catch them in. If you're going to have a roll like that take place, and there's nothing wrong with that, but understand that when the moment those dice get introduced into the situation, anything goes. Like, all right, so in this situation, socialite goes into a bar, goes to pick up a chick. I roll for a reaction roll or a disposition roll, whatever you call it, you know, for your game, and I get a terrible failure on this. Well, she's in a terrible mood. She splashes a drink in the guy's face, or she slaps him because she was offended about the approach. Or maybe there's a jealous boyfriend that was right next to her that you didn't notice, and he starts getting into a fight with you at the bar, right? So what you've done is this character that this should have been a walk in the park, now you've introduced all of this drama and all of this friction and tension into the scene that really, depending on what's happening in the game, maybe it doesn't make sense for all of these things to start taking place, right? Especially if this was meant to be just something really quick and easy, maybe even something to do in downtime. But because you made a roll where you could have just narrated the results, now you've introduced the chance of it going terribly wrong. If that makes sense in the game session, sure, cool, you know, do that. But just understand that with the moment you say, okay, I'm going to roll this roll to see her attitude or her mood, you've put it into the realm of it can go either way, okay? If you're not happy and content with the success or failure, then don't roll for it, okay? Just narrate it. Anyway, guys, that's what I think about this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below.